Mr. Woolner joins me here today after school. We're in his classroom and we have quite a long career to go over, but a lot of really interesting information. So let's just start off with childhood and high school. Where'd you grow up, Mr. Woolner?
Um, I spent most of my grade school years and high school years in Rhode Island. I went to school in Warwick, Rhode Island, at a high school called the Bishop Hendricken High School, which is now a sports powerhouse. It was not as much back then. It was a very small school when I went there, but it has since they do a lot of championships down there now. You want me to just keep talking about that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, in high school, I did not do much in the way of sports. I did ski for a little while with the ski team, I think when I was senior year, but I really have no good memories of that. I guess you could say that my skiing went downhill while I was there. Um, College, though, I went on to college for a couple of years in Amherst, Massachusetts at Hampshire College, where I learned absolutely nothing, except I did learn how to fence with swords. I started fencing there. I took a course up at UMass Amherst, and then really did a lot of fencing. I progressed and ended up going to the national championships twice. And then when I left Hampshire, I actually coached. You didn't ask that, but I was a coach at Holy Cross College for a couple of years, 3, 4 years.
What
That was an experience.
was your passion about the sport, and having success with it and having a positive impact on your life? What
Oh,
drove you
absolutely.
to?
Yeah. I mean, it was, I mean, it was the first time that that I was truly successful and really good at a sport. And I could also teach people how to do it. And I didn't know that, but I found that out when I started coaching at Holy Cross. And we had some very good fencers there. Um, and I'm still in touch with some of them, some of my students there, my fencers. Anyway, so I fenced there at Holy Cross while I was living in Worcester, Massachusetts, and at some point decided to go back to school and went to Worcester State College in Worcester, where I started studying photography and media and became a photographer soon after graduation. And while I was there doing photography, I ended up with another major, history. That was almost by chance. I mean, I was just a photography major, but it turned out I had enough classes to do it as a double major, which it turns out in retrospect worked out very well for me because here I am taking advantage of that other half of that degree.
Would you like to talk about both photography and history and what certain events sparked your interest in those subjects?
History was always of interest to me from high school on, history and social studies. I loved reading about events and I loved reading about the world. I loved reading about China and that I remember back then in the 70s, 80s, which is what we're speaking of, China was still largely unknown in the West, in the circles that I was in. What was happening there was still behind bamboo curtain, as it were. And I just loved reading about events that had taken place there. So I always loved taking history courses and learning about history, which is why I ended up with all of those courses at Worcester State, which allowed me to have a degree in history, bachelor's degree in that. Whereas the photography was what I was trying to study so as to become a photographer, in particular newspaper work,
Okay.
which is what I have here to show you.
All right, so we'll get into that. So let's go to probably one of the coolest things we have to talk about, which is how your sports photography ended up taking you to the Boston Garden and the Boston Celtics games with a lot of the really greatest legends in Celtics history. So who did you see there? And
everyone. This is during the Larry Bird era. And when you watch the games and you see people sitting at the baseline with cameras in their laps, that was me when I look back at some of the videos of those games with Larry Bird and Robert Parrish and um, all of those people, Kevin McHale, I kind of look for myself because I'm in a lot of those backgrounds. You can see me there.
That's great.
It is. And so I was there for lots of games. I was there for Danny Ainge's first game when he first wore the Celtics uniform. I have a photograph somewhere, although it's not here, of his first basket. One of my images appeared in the Worcester Gazette of his first game. So, you know, it was amazing being able to be right there.
And be a part of history.
And yeah, to see it that close, to see it and be a part of it that close, it was just wonderful. But it was also local sports. It was, you know, local high school baseball teams and local football teams and pickup games at middle schools and all sorts of
So
things.
this was for the Evening Gazette and
Evening
the
Gazette,
Worcester
Worcester Telegram.
Okay.
Telegram.
Telegram. Okay. So you got involved in that because college or?
Yes. So while I was at Worcester State, I was studying photography and I had some options as to what to do. And you could do fashion photography, you could do art photography. I was drawn to journalism, sports and events and things happening, and it seemed fun. It seemed the best way to use a camera. And so I approached a couple of different newspapers there in Worcester. There was the Worcester magazine, which I worked for a little while. And then I went and interviewed with Ken Boddy at the Worcester Evening Gazette. I think he was the managing editor then. And he offered to give me a chance as an internship there. So that's where I went. And I worked with them for years.
Okay. So when you got into these games, were you paying as a fan or did you get media credentials?
No, it was media credentials. You had a Worcester Telegram badge or something, and
you could get in for free.
get in, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, and events too. I mean, at the Worcester Centrum, I saw everybody: Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I saw Judas Priest. I saw Aerosmith. I saw all of the bands at the Centrum, and you get in for free. You shoot some photos. You go back. U2. I saw U2. I saw just everybody. And so then you'd shoot for a while and then get back over to the Evening Gazette and process your film really super fast and then make some prints super fast and put them on the editor's desk super fast and then go home. And they'd be in the paper the next morning. Yeah, it was amazing. It was thrilling.
So let's see some of the photos you got.
Okay. So this is part of my portfolio from years ago. How am I going to hold this up? Something like this?
Yeah,
Can you see that one?
that's a little hard with the
Yeah,
glare, but here, I'll move the
So that's
computer
a
over,
high
yeah.
school baseball game. I do not remember which. I'd have to read caption, and there's that. And below that is a softball game of a pitcher being doused by the catcher because of overheating in the middle of the day. And here's a couple more. Here's another baseball game. Someone sliding into second base. Can you see that one? And then the whole team celebrating the win afterwards. And below that, yeah, is some crew photographs. This was some crew races on Lake Quinsigamond, which were held in the spring there. Some championship races, so they're holding up some trophy. Here's Danny Ainge. This is not his first game, but there we go. There's Danny Ainge, and he is holding on to Tree Rollins by the seat of his pants. And there's a hockey player removing his helmet. I think that's a youth hockey player, not one of the Bruins.
Yep, that's a youth hockey player.
I think it's. And what's the other way? Click. It wasn't always sports. I mean, sometimes there's just photographs of events that you get off to see. I do remember getting up into St. Vincent's Hospital, and this was a priest, and he was administering last rites to a woman lying down in bed. She was passing, and he was comforting her. And
They're both smiling there in that
oh
photograph.
yeah.
So you captured a moment with somebody passing away, yet still joy in life.
Well, yeah.
What's that mean to capture that moment to you?
Well, I mean, you're always trying to capture a moment that can speak in a photograph without a lot of caption.
Mhm.
And if it works, it works. If it's speaking to you, I guess it works. How's that?
Yeah.
This one right here is some nuns who were being entertained by some students who had come to visit. And there you go. Let's see what else. A couple more real quick. What's the other one? Click. All right. So here is an ice storm. I distinctly remember this ice storm in Worcester. Worcester is a city of hills, and you can see the car up at the top that is sliding down the hill sideways. And I just happened to see it at the top of the hill, starting to slide. And so I jumped out of my car and positioned myself at the bottom while it slid down towards me. And got that image. And below that, I went to a diner afterwards for a cup of coffee. And while I was seated, I noticed the guy a couple of seats over had a whole bunch of screws threaded into the soles of his boots so he could walk around. So he allowed me to take a couple of photographs of his boots with the screws. And I guess I like those last couple of photographs because I don't want to say they're grabbed. It's because you didn't expect that. You know, you're out trying to tell the story of the ice storm and stuff is there. It's just happening. And you have to come up with a way to position yourself or to position the camera to tell that story. Hopefully, again, without a caption. Does that make sense?
Yeah. They say
It
pictures
was-
worth 1,000 words, right?
I guess so. It was a blast, absolute blast, going to all of those concerts, going to the different events. Sadly, seeing some sad things. There were times where it was difficult because of the emotion of the moment, but it was always part of the job.
Do you feel as though you've had a more fulfilling life because you were able to get out and not just be stuck in an office, and you were actually able to get out and experience other people's lives and experience what they're going through and kind of
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I've had several careers. There's another career in between here that we didn't actually talk about. I was a mechanic in a garage for a while as well.
Okay.
I worked at a Volvo, BMW, and Mazda dealership as a line mechanic for quite a few years between when I first dropped out of college and went back to Worcester State. So that career where I got to fix things, which I love to do, was a blast, but you're not really interacting with many people. You're interacting with nuts and bolts and grease and so on, and that's about it. And then the teaching of fencing to those students at Holy Cross kind of sparked me that I wanted to do more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided to not be a photographer, but not to be a mechanic, but to perhaps try photography, because I was still doing that as a little bit of a hobby. Then that was a blast, being a photographer. But being a photographer is hard. Being a photographer in newspapers is really difficult, and newspapers were closing down, and they still are, and there are very few jobs in the newspaper world anymore, sadly.
What's your expectation for the future of news?
Oh, wow. It's going digital, and I still get my newspaper in the morning in paper. Rusty runs out, gets the paper, brings it in, drops it on the floor for me, so I can read a paper newspaper in the morning with my cup of coffee. My wife opens up her tablet and reads the very same paper on her tablet. I think the tablet is where it's going to be only in some more handful of years, but I'm going to keep reading the paper version as long as I can. Yeah, so there's news and newspaper world has changed dramatically. The Concord Monitor employs one photographer now. They used to have 4 or 5.
Why is that?
Money. It's hard to fund a paper if nobody is subscribing. It's hard to financially support it if businesses aren't advertising in the newspaper. So newspapers are folding. They're also being bought up by larger newspapers that then tear them apart and sell off bits and pieces. And it's ending.
Let's throw you a fun question here. Mr. Woolner is in charge of all the newspapers in America, and he gets to decide how we're going to improve the news and what rules of thumb we're going to follow in order to achieve that. What are you going to do?
Wow. So I don't know. How do you get people to read a newspaper, to be willing to pick up a newspaper and look through it and read about what's happened the day before? And I really don't know. Most people are getting their news so immediately. I mean, we already know, who won that soccer match this morning in the World Cup.
Yeah.
Whereas 40 years ago, in the 1980s, when I was doing this, you'd wait for the morning paper, or maybe read about it, or hear it in the nightly news broadcast, but you'd read about it the next day. That doesn't happen anymore. So it's already columns that are out there digitally. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I like the newspaper. I like holding the paper. I like seeing it in print. I do scroll through them digitally, but I like the paper version. We get stacks of newspapers delivered here at our school. I wonder how many people are actually reading those actual print newspapers.
We have been reading them in journalism class.
Yes. Excellent.
So
excellent.
there's something there.
Excellent. So somehow we got to get families to not only read them when they're in school in journalism class, but also to subscribe to those papers, to somehow support them. I suppose you could do some public support of newspapers, like through some government support. It used to be that way back, 200 years ago. They were actually supported by governments, and then there were some political parties that supported the other newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So at one time there were several newspapers in a city, and you got to subscribe to the one you wanted. I hadn't thought about that too much before. That's kind of like siloing the news, the way some people now only watch Fox News, or some other people only watch MSNBC,
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's similar to that.
Yeah. So I think a variety of opinions is also key.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Got to read the op-ed pages as well.
So in tying this in with sports, you had all this about the Celtics
Yep.
and about crew and
Yep.
getting the film that, and then there's some history there as well, and the coaching is really what seemed to spark your interest in teaching to a certain extent. So let's go to teaching now.
Sure.
So you started off substitute student teaching in Massachusetts.
Yes, that's where I was getting my certificate and master's degree in education. Yep. So Shrewsbury High School, Shrewsbury Middle School, Oxford. There was an Oxford Middle School. There were a couple of schools in Worcester itself that I did some work at. But then when it became time to find a permanent teaching job, I started casting all over. I was looking in North Carolina, thought I might move to North Carolina. That didn't work out, but I started looking around. I had an interview in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, and that didn't go well. I could tell right away that I was not going to get that job. I mean, the person was asking me the questions, and he never looked at me, in the interview.
Yeah.
And so went out to the car. My wife was there, and said, well, that one, I don't think we're going to come back here. And then I had another interview an hour later or 2 hours later in New Hampshire. So I drove up to New Hampshire with my wife in the car and our two little girls strapped into the back seat, and interviewed in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, for a teaching job there at the middle school. And it worked. He offered me a job at the end of the interview. I thought it was a history job. And I was selling myself to the principal who was interviewing me as teaching history the entire time. And at the end of the interview, he said, I should tell you, it's not a history job, it's geography. I paused and I said, I can do that too. here I am.
So it was history. You were
Yes.
passionate about history and you
Yes.
had a pause there, but
Yeah.
now
It's geography.
it's geography.
Yeah.
And you, at the start of the year, you have your syllabus you hand out to your students.
Yeah.
And every time the word geography is listed in that syllabus, it's followed by an exclamation point.
That's
And
right.
it
I'm
shows
glad you
how
remember.
passionate you are about that subject.
That's exactly right.
How did it become that way?
It's just that much. It's fun. It's fun to do. It's with geography, you can do anything. You can talk about history. You can talk about rocks. You can talk about clothing. You can talk about languages. You can talk about books, art, short stories, novels,
Ties into history.
everything. You can talk about anything. You can talk about food. Um, in northern China, they do wheat-based meals, noodles. Southern China, they do rice-based meals. It's geography. So you can talk about anything and it becomes geography. We can do math. We can do Roman numerals and Mayan numerals. It's all geography.
So that was 1992. You started at Hillsborough.
Yep.
You know, finished. So that was fall of 92. Finished in spring of 97. Then came here. So what'd you learn from Hillsborough, and why did you end up leaving after 5 years? Or 4 years, actually.
5 years.
5, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, because from 92 to 95, that's 5 years, but 4 school years, right? Because
No, there were definitely 5 school years. I mean, I guess we'd have to figure out the math of doing it, but you know,
93,
let's not do
94,
it, but it was
95,
pretty sure it was 5.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
The kids were great. The kids were great. They enjoyed what we were doing. My first year was tough, but the kids were great. But we were teaching without a contract there. There's no money in the town of Hillsborough for things, for the most part. It was certainly not then. And at that time, with a master's degree, I was earning not enough so I could qualify for food stamps. You know, it was not enough money. And it didn't see that there was going to be any change. So after 5 years of teaching, they're at that same level. I had an offer. I got a call from some teachers here that they had an opening and if I'd be interested in applying for it. So I did, and they took me. So here I am. It hurt me to not be teaching in the town that I lived in. It hurt me to not be teaching at the school where my own daughters were going to go to school. But this was the right move financially, and it was the right move in terms of support, not just from kids, but from an administration and a town in general. So I came here and it's been great. This has been a great place to teach. This is the best school in the state of New Hampshire, in my opinion.
1997 until now,
Yeah.
we're in 2022,
Yeah,
25
5
years.
years. I think it's about 5 years. Feels like about 5 years.
It does.
Yeah.
And you have no plans on retiring anytime
No.
soon. What is
As
it?
long as we don't have to go back to Zoom. If we have to go back to this thing with cameras, and I'm not doing that. I'll put no. But as long as we can teach in person, I'll be fine.
What is it about teaching that just captures your interest so much?
Every day is a little bit different. Every day is you're working with kids that are lively and fun and interesting and excited and are willing to be excited, and it's a blast every day. I mean, imagine waking up and saying, yes, I get to go to work today. Every day is like that. This is great. This is just great.
That's great. So it's really cool to see your passion for it all. I really appreciate being able to capture those moments, tell those stories about why people are so passionate. What is it that you think you do to help support the kids becoming young people in the world that keeps you here and keeps you doing what you do?
Well, I mean, it's all the same thing. I mean, we're giving them an opportunity to look at the world and understand more about it, and more about different tools that they can use to understand more about the world. So it's not just It's knowing how to find out things that excites me, so that students that I work with, I hope, will be able to then go out there and continue learning and being thrilled with the world around them. You know, because it's an absolutely incredible place. So yeah, I'm just happy to be here. Happy to be here, Coach. It's a great place. Just give me a chance to be part of the team.
There's been, and definitely more prominently in recent years since the pandemic, there's been public complaints about education, and everybody's, how do we fix education? How do we improve education? Kids have more anxiety now, or this or that or the other thing. What have you seen as a teacher that's different from prior, 20 years of prior teaching before the pandemic? How do we improve that? Even if theoretically we didn't have a pandemic, how do we improve education? Just rules of thumb that everybody should be able to kind of find some common ground on.
Smaller classroom sizes, more time with the kids, less time with administration stuff, like administrative stuff. Like, I love teaching. I have to keep grades. I have to keep track of things, and administrivia sort of things can get in the way. So more time with kids, more opportunities with smaller numbers of kids, more that's all that it takes. And if kids could leave their cell phones in their lockers, that would be good too. High school as well. Sadly, that you guys get to carry them around with you all day. But anyway, yeah, just more actual face-to-face time like this that makes all the difference. Whereas this video stuff, if we had to go back to Zoom, that's not going to happen. But face-to-face time with kids, with smaller numbers of kids.
What is it that you wish the parents knew about the teachers and what the teachers are doing in this building to try and just do their jobs and sacrifices that are made that you wish that they could understand?
I think they understand. When we go on the field trips, like to Cardigan, I invite as many parents along as possible. And they know. They can see what we're doing. They can see what's happening. I'm pretty convinced parents know what I'm doing. I'd like to think that kids are explaining to parents what we do. I hope there's lots of discussion at the dinner table. What'd you do in school today? And I hope that they're saying, it was a blast. Here's what we did.
Yeah.
So I think parents have a pretty good idea of what we're doing, right?
Yeah. That's good. So let's briefly, before we wrap up here, I want to go into Cardigan.
Sure.
Why do you go to Cardigan every year?
Let's see. My first year of teaching here, the 7th grade team went on a field trip to Hulbert Center in Fairleigh, Vermont. And it was 5 days. And it was wicked expensive, and it was at the end of the school year. And it was really good experience. But at the end of the year, then the kids go on to the 8th grade and you don't get to see them again. And you don't get to say, oh, wasn't that great when we were, because they've gone to the next grade level. And it was wicked expensive. So it didn't make any sense. So the next year they stopped doing that. The year after that, the science teacher at the time and I said, why don't we do something like that, but at the beginning of the year, where we can, and make it be more affordable, so that we can get out, enjoy, learn, bond, understand kids, they can understand us, and then come back to the building and be able to build on that for the rest of that same school year. And so we started going to Cardigan at that time. That was the 3rd year that I was teaching here. And we've done it every year since, and it's been better and better and better. And we've modified and changed things to improve things. And every year it's a little different, and every year it's a little better. And it's part of the reason to go there is the environment is similar to what's here in Hopkinton. So the same trees that they see at Cardigan, they're going to see here. The same rocks, essentially, that they see there will be here. The same stone walls that they see there will be here. So you're exposing them and making them look and see the environment, understand the relationship of the environment and people there. And then you can come back to Hopkinton and look around and see some similar things. It's not that much different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see some overlap with what Coach Chase was saying about how his sports teams, whenever he has a sports team, he will try and take them out on a trip. Oftentimes he takes the baseball team pretty much every year to Cooperstown to try and develop that group bonding.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you believe in like that same
Oh,
principle?
yeah, absolutely. And if you can work with that, that's wonderful. And if you do it at the beginning of the year, then you have the whole year
Yeah.
to call upon that. If you do it at the end of the year, you don't get to get the full advantage of what you've done.
That makes sense. So last question I'm gonna ask you. Advice for students when you whether it's leaving your classroom, as you know, it's June, July, and August, the three best words of teaching, maybe. When that happens and you're going on to the next grade, there'll be stuff that you carry from this classroom with you. And at the end of the year, for those of us who are graduating this year, there'll be stuff that we carry with us from not only a classroom, but this whole school, this town, and take with us for the rest of our lives. What things do you want us to carry the most, and what advice do you have as somebody who's been around and had a lot of different experiences that you wish you knew when you were my age?
Well, to keep your eyes open, to take advantage of opportunities, to take some risks, to try different things, to not feel that the path that you're on is necessarily the one that you will always be on. I mean, I switched careers 3 solid times. I switched schools. Things aren't always linear, but things work out.
Thank you, Mr. Woolner.
My pleasure.